Adam paced back and forth in front of Eve, but Eve was still sitting on the dead tree, examining every detail of death, the grayness, the dryness, the utter lifelessness. How did the life leave? Was she herself life, or was life something within her that might leave? She didn't know, but she wondered. She didn't think Adam knew either. Only God knows, she said at last. Adam looked up now from his thoughts. Only God knows what, he said. What I am, Eve said. You're Eve, Adam retorted. I know that. Yes, I know that I'm Eve. But what is Eve? What is living? Huh? Adam was almost caught away from his critical situation to thinking about dead things. We have no time for thinking about dead trees. God will take care of the thinking of dead things, he said. We will take care of the thinking of shelter. We could get inside this tree, Eve said assuringly. Plenty big for sleeping, and the wind can't find us in there. We'll be warm if we sleep in there. Is that what dead things are for, Adam? Are we supposed to find these things that die and use them for our own needs? Adam was contemplating what Eve was saying. It really wasn't a bad idea. There was plenty of room. Maybe this was something God had provided for them. He thought, was there a reason that things die? But really Adam knew the dead things were dying because of their rebellion. It seemed strange to make use of these things for their own pleasure when it had been them who had caused their death. He would have to think of these things later. Right now, he had to get Eve a place to live. Come inside, Adam. It's warm in here. We can't live here, said Adam. He stood straight with pride. I shall not use these dead things for my own needs. I shall provide for you myself. But why, Adam? I like it here. It was a beautiful place, Adam thought. It was almost like Eden. Even the dead things had a sort of beauty. He wondered why dead things could be beautiful. Not far from there was a cascading waterfall that bounded down from the nearby cliffs. There were plenty of water for drinking here and bathing. And the songbirds seemed to be singing as though it were only for Adam and Eve that they played their beaks. Adam had thought that God would not protect them. But here and there, he did find things that just seemed to indicate that this was for them. Adam was really baffled by all of his surroundings. Why would God create these things for him? Why would God make trees die because he sinned? And then, as if everything quite depended upon him, even Eve was more and more seeming to depend upon him. Adam wondered how he would bear all of the new burdens. He remembered God's words to him only yesterday. The ground shall be cursed on his account. Who was Adam to be responsible for all these things? Adam walked over to the other side of the log. There was grass bristling up to his ankles. Adam could feel the soft touch of the blades as they tickled his feet. It was beautiful here, he thought again. He walked further towards the pond-like lake, which was more than 50 yards from the log where Eve lay. The water was crystal clear, and he could see fish swimming around in the water. Adam wondered about fish. Were they like other animals? Did they like to play and sleep? As Adam approached the big pond, he could hear the rushing sound of the falls as they hit the waters beneath. There was a doe and her fawn waiting silently in the shallow places. The little fawn was drinking the cool water. Adam wondered if his child would look like him, only smaller. Yes, in many ways, Adam liked his new home. He even thought he liked to work hard. For in that way, it made Eve love him more and seemed to bring him closer together. Eve now touched his shoulder and slid her eloquent hand down Adam's back as she knelt down beside him. Adam hadn't known that she was behind him, but he didn't show her that he was startled. They sat quietly, Eve comforting Adam with her touch, just staring and wondering, thoughts that left questions in both of their minds that only God could answer. Dusk came and found Adam snuggled next to Eve, deep inside the big tree. This was their home, and as it was meant to be. That night, Adam and Eve learned something far more beautiful than waterfalls and dead trees. Adam grew to love Eve more and more. And Eve was happy, happier than anyone could ever be, she thought. At that moment, she knew that God had done something far greater than they had imagined before, and that there was a very great plan that was being worked out for them both. Their destiny had been written. God's plan was being worked out. Theirs would be the destinies of beautiful grace. Life was so wonderful. Eve was bound up with great happiness. Yes, she could hardly find room in her heart for her joy. Months passed now. Adam and Eve were still enjoying their fascinating life of intrigue and illusion. Life didn't seem real to Adam anymore. His life was taking on new meanings now. It seemed to find its wandering within the changing scenes of country and phantasmal spasmodics. It was the changing reality. Trees were like illusions. Mountains were like higher planes of consciousness. There was where the evil god must live, he suspected. He saw many mountains in his wanderings. There were little hills, great spiraling tower-like edifices, and cascading crags, tapering off into the deep basin bluffs, overhanging bent mile-high canyons. But there was one mountain that seemed to be intriguing, curiously towering, standing almost alone above the rest, and without a doubt, fear-inspiring. And this mountain was different in other ways, too. It spoke. Its voice moaned as though in agony. It steamed from its top as though with a raging tempest. This was where God had banished the slanderer, he thought. And though that was somewhat comforting, Adam still wondered. Its rage, it was awesomely terrifying. He remembered the words of the slanderer, "I am God, and I shall make thee to do an act of worship to me. I shall sit at the assembly of the gods." And God's words to Eve, "He shall bruise thy heel." What would it all mean? Only the cycles of the sun disk would tell. Adam wondered what would happen after many suns had come and gone. Adam had been out in the woodlands of the great giant trees almost all day. The trees were so large and huge. Many of them reached to the sky, to the heavens. He had seen the edge of the woodlands today, although it had cost him nearly 3/4 of this arcing sun disk. Adam had wondered if the world had ended there, or whether it went on into other mysterious places. It went on, but Adam knew of no way to get beyond its boundary, for at the edge of the woodland there lay, as it were, a great chasm. The chasm was 7 days' journey deep, and at least that many days' journey wide. It cut across the breadth of the earth like the great serpent that wreathed through the swampy marshland. Beyond the brim of the chasm he had never gone, nor could he ever imagine to go. Adam gave that land the name of Nod, for that would be a place of a fugitive to travel, and not the man Adam. It was nearly dark when Adam finally reached the dead tree. Adam had unrestful feelings near all the way back. Something wasn't sitting right with Adam. Approaching the tree from the backside, Adam could hear unusual sounds. Eve was moaning and breathing strangely. Adam rushed over to the big hole on the other side of the twisted dead tree. Eve was lying on her back with her legs all scrunched up against the top of the ceiling of the hollow. She looked at Adam without changing her position. Adam crawled into the mouth of the opening. He sat staring at Eve for a moment, and then he left her alone. He knew that it had come time for the birth of his child, and there was nothing he could do to stop the pain. For it had been decreed by the angel, "It shall be with great pain that ye shall bring forth the delivering one." Well, the time had come, and now he must wait. So in time, Adam's son grew strong and tall, and he had another son as well. The first son he called Cain, but his younger brother he named Abel. Now Cain and Abel grew up under the watchful eye of their parents, but as young boys will usually do, they many times fought. A great opposition began to grow among the two brothers. Cain was a big man with thick black hair, his shoulders and neck a massive size. and with the strength of an ox, he could usually outperform Abel with little effort. Abel, on the other hand, was more delicate, more astute with the finer things in life. Cain thought that Abel should work harder. He doesn't pull his weight around here. And Cain would say, he's always lying around dreaming, and Cain's wrath grew from day to day. As they matured into manhood, Cain took to doing the hardest jobs. Cain eventually became the breadwinner of the family. Cain cultivated much of the marshland near where they had lived, now for more than 30 years. But Abel came to admire the animals, spending most of his time grooming and just talking to the creatures he would chance to meet. Of course, he knew he had responsibilities too, but he would find a better way to find nourishment. Working that hard old ground day and night for sustenance was, in his opinion, uncanny. Surely God didn't have that kind of laborious travail in mind. When he put them out in this fairest of all elements, there was sure to be other means of food to be found. So, Abel thought to himself, what has God intended for man? Where are the secrets of life hidden? He would ask his fair-weather friends when he made his daily rounds through the countryside. In time, he had found many of God's secrets within nature. As Abel watched the animals, he noticed that they didn't work. The cow ate grass, and it was provided for him plentifully. Abel tried eating grass. He found it was untasteful. It made him vomit. The birds ate little nuts and bark from trees, but that wouldn't work for a human because he could not find enough nuts for his terrible hunger. Abel didn't like bark enough to even give it a healthy try. But Abel soon learned of things to eat like milk and honey. He found that he could make the milk into cheese and butter. He learned about eggs and caviar. And this was what Abel brought to the table to supplement Cain's growing garden foods. Adam and Eve would cook the many fruits that Cain would bring to the dinner. Eve found that many of the roots could be boiled and made into a broth. Others could be crushed and into a mesh and baked. It took many years of trial and error, but Abel's milk and cheese were used to make breads and delicacies that Adam and Eve relished. When Cain saw that Abel's contribution was the favorite, his wrath grew. So Cain began to cultivate the ground, which by doing, he increased the size and the abundance of the various roots and flowering buds that grew from what he planted. But this still took lots of time and great strenuous effort. In the end, it took long hours each day for his garden to grow much food, with little more worth than Abel's, which he was simply gathering and churning. Now Abel had invented another thing, which Adam and Eve had praised their son for in considerable merriment. Adam and Eve had until this time been wearing leaves and grass-like skirts. Not that they really needed clothing for warmth, seldom got cold, but because that was the way Eve had instructed them to do. Eve considered this sexual organ something to be kept private, unseen, hidden. Now, the killing of animals for either food or clothing had not been allowed either then nor at any other time thereafter for over 1,000 years. True, many years later, the giants came and began to kill. This was the great terror to all men on earth. But Abel came to be a herder of sheep and cattle. Abel began to shave the wool that the sheep had so much of an abundance of, and he weaved that together to make a substance which became a cloth, which he and Adam would wear around their loins. But Eve would wear this over her entire body, for she said, "My sons have no women. I fear they will see my body and think unthinkable thoughts. For my body is for Adam alone. God shall yet provide for my children's mates." But Abel's soft wool clothes made Eve very happy indeed. Now Cain, in his pride, refused to wear these soft clothes made by his younger brother. "These clothes are for those who are soft in heart," he said. So by and by their rivalry grew more. Now Abel, with his softer character, began to inhabit the highland thicket country, where there were many animals and birds. He became a herder of sheep and cattle, while in Cain's bitterness he went out from his father and mother, despising his father's counsel, who had said, "He shall not go near the chasm of Nod, for no one shall go there and keep living." He went out, he took up dwelling in that land. Now the land of Nod produced no vegetation whatsoever. It was just rock, with only very little soil, but enough soil that in time Cain had a variety of plants and food-bearing trees and shrubs growing. Cain was determined to show his father that he could do whatever he pleased, and his ways were better than Abel's. Now, Cain despised anything and everything that his brother liked or anything his brother invented. He wouldn't use anything that might make them soft, as he would say. He boasted that he enjoyed to work, and work hard. That's what God put us here for, he would say. Now, though he never dared to show it, Cain was lonely. He wondered about persons of the opposite sex at times. But till now there was only Cain and Abel and their two sisters, Awan and Aklia. It was an unusual morning. Cain was up early, as was his habit. He had a big fire blazing, and he was sipping the juice from a boiled dandelion root out of a cup he had carved from the lower half of a burl off an old oak tree. You could see the great sun disk as it rose like a flaming torch, as a purifying forge in a great cauldron of affliction. Cain liked the sun disk especially. It rested his sense of understanding. Life was like that old disk, he thought, round and round, toiling upon the duties of every day, burning up all that stood in its path, and an enemy to all that softened its presence with cunning devices. Those who sought to evade their duties through technological advantage would be burned up by the burning heat of the toil that they sought to flee. They would get softer and softer, he thought. Better to work hard with all that thy hand finds to do, for better is the day of your death than the day you were born. Now there was a river at the bottom of Nod. It was deep as 7 days' journey. The great river was wide. It was the biggest river Cain had ever seen, at least a half a mile across. Now the morning blaze was condescending down from the heights. Even now, with only 1/4 of its arc having shone, it seemed to be taking an unusually long time to rise. The mist from the bottom of the canyon was hovering low around the rim, snaking around the bluffs like a filming plasmic ghost, floating, hovering, searching, feeling around everywhere and around every nook and edifice, trying to find any unnoticed crack or opening in which to infiltrate this gaseous substance. Even on a clear morning, you would find this canyon misty, still volcanic in nature, steaming out every pore and hole out of the cracks of every face, through the crevices and openings. There were yellow-red stains following the hot spring paths that trickled down from the terraces, with sulfur-green blotches here and there. And except for the green patch growing on the western slope, jetting in and out of the terracing rock pillars, and jettisoning towers which protruded out from the bluffs, like a land of giant rock people solidified in their steps, there was no vegetation at all. And that green was supplied by the man named Cain. It was he that had brought it there, planting every bush, cultivating every tree, plowing the unyielding soil that lay in the crevices of the slopes. He had created this land, a land for the type of man he was, unyielding in attitude, hard in nature, grotesque in stature. But all of this was Cain's land. It was all normal for him. Nothing really was out of place, except that this morning Cain felt a sort of deep longing, a longing for the one thing he felt missing. And the arid soil and the misty air seemed to culminate with an eerie resounding, the feelings Cain was knowing. And except for the slow sipping from the dandelion beverage, all was silence and respite. For the feeling within him wasn't like a noise. It didn't tremble or moan. Cain wasn't that sort of man. In fact, Cain was hardly aware of the yearning within himself. He was no whiner. He would push that insipid feeling back into his subconscious mind. Thinking long on those things wasn't his style. No, the feeling within Cain was more like a pressure. It squeezed at his heart silently. It only annoyed him circumspectly, not rushingly, slowly, but tremendously. With every growing pound upon his lonely heart, Cain could sense its ugly nagging, only subconsciously. But he never heard the cry out loud, and still he thought of what his wife might look like. She would be tall and strong like him, no weakling for Cain. Yet she would be eloquently refined from his masculine version. He pictured her in his mind for a moment, not really on purpose, though a stereotype model was amassing within his subconscious. From the dreams he had known, he suspected. He liked that dream. He had been having that same dream now often. Sometimes it would linger like that smoldering mist through the canyons of his consciousness. The memory would hesitate, and then his will would push it aside, as he usually did. But this morning, the images and fantasies wouldn't leave as quickly. Sometimes Cain would wake up in the middle of the night, perspirating with big pellets of sweat dripping down his massive forehead. This dream, or whatever, with its images, real or contrived, Cain sometimes didn't know, was actually becoming real to Cain. His thoughts weren't able to dislodge his memories as well now. Cain kept sitting on the terrace of boulders around him, looking off into the direction of the pillars, his mind focusing on the dream. Now there was one edifice-like pillar that stood just off to Cain's left. It was unusually delicate in its sloping, terracing, cascading shapeliness. But Cain had never seen that particular rock before. As his mind now drifted further and further into what was more and more becoming reality for Cain. Now out from the rocks, Cain saw or heard something, noticed something, a moving or a rustling. Cain stood up, his massive body bulging, straining to see what it was. A woman appeared, walking straight out from the paralyzed stone figures. "Hello," the woman beckoned. "Who are you?" Cain said. "I'm Lilith," she said. "How did you get here?" "I know of no woman like you," Cain said. "Not consciously," said the woman, "but you know of me all right. I am the woman in the darkness of your thoughts. When light comes, I am darkness. When you dream, I live. That's why I have come to beseech thee." "What could you ask of me?" Cain replied quickly. "I am Cain. I have nothing but this land and these rocks. Do you want rocks? I have land in myself. Nothing else have I to give." "But that is what I want from you," said the woman. "I want yourself. And as for this land, I already own it. For whatever 'tis yours has already been mine. Even thyself belongs to me. I have already been with thee forever. Now I have come to receive thy consciousness." Cain thought back into his dreams. This was truly the woman of the darkness of his thoughts. All that she said seemed true enough, but what of this giving she wanted? He would not give his consciousness to even this one, for that part of him was his alone. It could not be given to another. But Cain felt a great longing for her. This was the woman that he had waited for. Could she be the woman he was to be given from God? Was she the one he was destined to love? The inner longing had become the reality. Cain spoke again. "Oh, woman of my darkness, Queen Lilith of the night, I shall not give thee that, what you ask. I am myself. How can I give to thee which is to be entirely my own?" Lilith moved closer, almost gliding along the ground as she approached him. "I want nothing from you, silly Cain, my husband. I only want to give you something. That which you shall give me shall only be in quality. Your unity shall abide with thee forever. It cannot be given to another. Our passion to each other is like the darkness. It's always giving, but it's never consumed, and though it disappear, it will always return. I already am one with your inner thoughts. But they are like dancing images, shadows upon your mind, which when projected upon me make the images. Therefore, I am those images. I am your thoughts, and it is from those thoughts that you are formed, from the inner and then unto the outer manifestation. I have been forming your thoughts many years. Since the first moment thy mind beheld the light of your being, I was the essence that shadowed the light. Without that shadow there could be no image. Thine image is yourself, but the outer image is formed around the circumstances as well. When you meet other people, they are those you meet in the outer world. They can veil my inner workings, but only for a time, for they are only like fleeting thoughts whose images do not truly belong to you. Thus you can see, Cain, that I am within yourself. When the two become one, there is true peace of being. And when the outer becomes like the inner, there shall be no more longer two. I am a prophecy. I am your dream. Your dreams have come to pass now, and I am here. I have come to you in your dreams to be with you. I live on the moon, and I want you to come to me, and I will show you how. Now Cain listened to Lilith, her words dripping down from his inner subconscious mind like melting icicles from the sun. Cain would have resisted her cunning, but all that she said was true. Cain fell under the spell of her mental enchantment, like a moth around the eternal flame. His consciousness yielding like the great passion to the great fog of lust within his being, Cain reached out his hand up to Lilith's face, his hand beckoning his reply in subtle fashion, his finger finding the contour of her high cheekbone. He touched her satin skin ever so softly and gently. Cain had been polarized from within his entire being, from his very birth on down, always growing, falling ever deeper in love. This had not happened overnight. This was the woman Cain had chosen. She had not chosen him. Had she created him, or had he created her? She had begun in his mind early, developing around every whim and desire of Cain's subconscious mind. Now Lilith had become a reality. Now Lilith had become. Now Cain had become. He had become what he was, and they had become one. Now the sun disk was going down over a broad stretch of plain, a land of great wonder, the land where Abel dwelt. It was indeed a wonderful land. And now the sun disk was glistening with kaleidoscope refractions upon pristine phantasmal colors that spread in a rainbow pattern across miles of horizon that was only backdropped here and there with distinctions of hue, brilliant and also fading. The patchwork of delicately balanced flowers, shades from bright yellow to intermingling purple and green. The sky this evening was effervescent with ever-deepening violet, leaving the hinder region a turquoise with fluffy cotton clouds, silhouetting the foreside with pink, and a breeze blew silently past Abel's hair as he stood watching his world, the scene matching like a perfect rhythm the fantasies of his mind. Abel loved the land. He loved animals, life, just about everything, including his brother. Abel's character was a heartfelt knowing. He always followed his heart. He believed in his dreams. He relied upon his intuition. Cain was much too fixed mentally, Abel would complain. Though Cain was noble and almost heroic in many ways, he lacked sympathy, purity, and spontaneity. Abel lived by the seat of his pants. Life was a journey. The changing reality was reality for Abel. The mental fixation of rigidness that his brother Cain had built up around himself was about as far away from Abel's emotional plane of intuition as the morning sun was from the evening. But this didn't make Abel hate his brother. It only served to create within Abel's heart great sympathy for Cain, which was why Abel dreamed. He dreamed of paradise restored, wonderful love, and great happiness, an escape from reality, or at least the reality which was only apparent from Cain's point of view. For Abel saw no curse on this earth, only possibility. Abel looked up from his thoughts about his brother, now surprised, as if by some great coincidence. Abel immediately threw up his hands and went running out through the field to meet him. Cain embraced himself physically. as if to outwardly show resistance to Abel's forward welcome. But he didn't actually pull away, as Abel was embracing him. Abel weeping joyfully, he then bent down upon the ground in front of his older brother. Kneeling subjectfully, he humbly offered Cain the entire run of his land. Anything that Cain wanted would be graciously given. Cain had other things in mind that day. Cain was guided that day to the land of Abel by the vision. His mental forces prodding, Lilith was cunningly at work. The dark ego of Cain's thoughts had brought him to the final act. Had Abel been more astute and physically aware that evening, he might have used his mental powers more aggressively. But all Abel knew that day was joy in his heart to see his brother again. It had been some time for Abel. He had so many things to ask him about. How was he getting along? Did he get all of his trees planted like he wanted? Was he happy? But these questions could wait. Cain had something to show him now. This was great. To be going with his brother. He remembered when they were young. Like all brothers, they had their difficulties, competitions, jealousies, envies, but there had always been good times too. Abel remembered those days. Now, Abel thought back on those times, when he would come home late, having put the sheep down after the safety of darkness, the stillness of the night having stilled the lamb's fears. There would his brother be, still pruning, hedging, and cultivating his garden. In those days, there were many good times, and the memories were still fresh in his mind. But now the stage was set. There was no turning back for Cain. His covenant was with his inner longing for selfishness. Lilith had become one with Cain's thoughts and was now taking him to the frenzy of insanity. It was 3 days' journey to the land of Nod. Cain and Abel reached there the third day at dawn. Abel was spellbound. He had never seen anything like this land of Nod. The rugged terrain was harsh. Abel was clearly out of his normal environment. Cain was acting excited. There was much to show Abel now. They must walk down into the great gorge. They started without delay, and they quickly sped off down an old trail which seemed to be well used by Cain before. Cain knew that trail well. He seemed to be showing off, walking very quickly. It was hard for Abel to keep up. They jumped from rock to rock. It reminded Abel when they were young. They were always playing games like this one. This must be another one of Cain's games, he thought. I must not show that I'm tired. I can keep up with Cain if I try. If I tell him I'm tired, he's only going to laugh at me. So Abel hid his feelings, afraid to show himself as he really was. He was afraid that if he did not live up to Cain's standards, he would offend him. So he must keep going. Now, as they bounced along the trail, dodging limbs, jumping rocks, scaling the cliffs which rose above the rigid bluff-like places, like walls around fortified walls of desolation, below was nothing at all. Above was nothing. Only rocks, cracks, steam, and patches of fading hues. Little pebbles would skid as they cascaded down the sheer embankments. Abel's heart tightened with fear, but he still wouldn't surrender to Cain's desire for victory. Cain was at home here. He knew very well that these canyons would defeat his brother. One wrong move, one false step, then down Abel would tumble to his very death. Without the cooperation of Cain, Abel was doomed. He just couldn't function within Cain's realm without Cain's objective concern for the inner reality of Abel's lacking abilities upon the contrived and rigid fixation. The outright, unrelinquishing dogmatism of Cain. Abel slipped. His footing gave way to the loose gravel. He plunged to his death, and Cain rejoiced. Cain had taken his brother to the field of objective concentration. It was a direct assault upon Abel's emotional plane of being. Now later on that evening, Cain was sitting under a stalk of a green leafy shoot which sprang from a cleft of rock that served as a foundation for his sitting thus. He had already forgotten about Abel, for he had no feelings of regret. Not consciously, although conscience could not be submerged within him without the countermeasure of least retribution. There is never a cause without an effect. No one would miss the presence of his brother, but not far distant was the propensity of his actions culminating. The voice of the divine radiance reverberated down the canyon. It was heard everywhere throughout the canyon by all that could hear or that had ears to hear. That sound fell upon the ears of Cain as he sat upon the rock, hidden by the only apparent veiling of the green leafy shoot, that green thing that Cain had cultivated. In the garden that seemed to be growing now with grotesque forms, bending and twining around the structural but already ancient, even permanent elements of earth. Yes, even here, although gazing into that deepest of all glens, one would not expect to find that there should be such an ear, such as Cain's. Outwardly it appeared to be a land desolate and uninhabited. Yet in all places there are such ears, if they would only listen. And listen they will, except that for some it finds them only after the reverberation. But it finds the happy souls on the plain without such repetition. But also to all it does verily come, and come it did, that day to Cain, upon his rock, sitting under his retreat from reality, outwardly oblivious to the hideous ordeal. God then spoke, "Where is thy brother Abel?" Cain's guilty conscience knew inherently that he had been responsible for his brother's welfare. He was, after all, the eldest of the two. Had his father Adam not delegated that responsibility to him often, when he and Eve would take their long walks into the forest of the great giant trees that reached under the heavens? Cain replied to the angel, "Am I my brother's guardian?" But God did not return his sarcasm with injury, but only said, "Your brother now is whispering to me from within the elemental world beneath the ground, and now I will banish you two to the elemental planes. You will not bring your selfish reasoning powers within the lower field of activity. When you bring forth those elemental thoughts, they shall not bring forth their production. You will go to Hades to live like a brute. A wanderer and a fugitive you will become in your brother's plane. For just as he is gone there now, you will soon follow. This to fulfill the prophecy of your father. No one shall go to the land of Nod and keep living." But Cain spoke back to God, "My punishment is too great, for you are actually this very day driving me off the face of the earth and are sending me into the elemental kingdoms from the face of your glory and the land of astute reasoning power. You are concealing me within the veil, and there upon that plain I must become a wanderer, drifting around without a set course. The blackness of darkness has been reserved for me. I shall be twice dead, a wild wave of the sea, foaming out mine own shame, a rock of pride, hidden below the waters of life, and it is certain, if someone finds me, they will kill me." So the angel of God's face answered Cain, "Because of this I declare, if anyone kills you, they shall suffer vengeance 7 times. And God began to set a mark upon Cain, so that anyone who should find him would beware before he would think to kill him. God put a horn and made it grow right between the middle of his forehead. The horn was Cain's power. It was the sign of his destructive habits. It showed those that he had gored before. And then he caused his heart to be changed from being that of a man to that of a beast. His ugliness shall drive him away from mankind. His hideousness shall frighten the most stalwart of warriors. Then God said, "He shall eat vegetation like the animals. His hair will grow long like the scavenger, which eats and lives upon the death and the dead carcasses. His nails shall grow long like the bird's talons, so that he shall be fierce to all those who would seek his life. I have set these signs upon thee, but thou shalt not continue in this debased condition forever. 7 times shall pass over you, Cain, and you shall pass through the 7 gates of vengeance. Then you shall return to that natural state, and ye shall learn that it is I who rules in the kingdom of men, and to whom I want I give or refrain from giving. So Cain was sent away from the angel to the land of Nod. And there Cain took his wife Lilith, and they dwelt some years in the great canyon of Nod. Cain and Lilith gave birth to Enoch, and the child grew strong and capable, like his father. But as the angel had spoken, Cain should be a wanderer. The prophecy of God made to him was not to be just literal. Cain would now be going to the true land of Nod. The plan of God for Cain would make him a wanderer in the greater land of wandering, the netherworld, the place of Sheol. So Cain soon died and took up his residence there on the vast elemental realm. Cain became the prince of the realm of Nod, the land of wandering. Adam and Eve cried for their sons, lamenting and weary of hope that the promised deliverer would come and save their children from this awful state of affairs. Cain was now in Sheol, the land of the departed. Now the earth had been bereft for 100 years for Adam and Eve of their children, and they felt alone. They missed their children, the laughter, the social closeness of the family. They had needed their children, the insight of Abel, the hard-working nature of Cain. But something of Adam and Eve was missing, not just the memory of their sons or the love that they had for them, but some greater dimension was missing from their consciousness. Abel had added a spirituality that Adam and Eve would miss, and rearing him had deepened their appreciation for the unseen powers and the forces behind the scenes of nature. His peculiar insights into the higher possibilities of consciousness had added to their own spiritual potential. Now that potential was gone. Who would invent the new ideas? Who would bring out that intuitional prognosis within Adam's heart, expanding the inner awareness and heightening of the emotional acquisitions of life? Yes, Cain would also be missed. Cain had brought a certain outer reasonableness, a matter-of-fact type logic, a creative working which expanded the outer world, the outer consciousness, beautifying and supplementing Adam and Eve's thinking. But now they were both gone. Adam and Eve did bring forth many children, but none of their sons born would take the place of their firstborn. For 130 years they lived on earth, and then the man named Seth was born. Now Eve called her son Seth because she said, God has provided a substitute for our son Abel, because Cain killed him. Through him we will see the delivering one. Seth grew up and became strong. In time, Eve accepted Seth as the perfect substitute for her son Abel. She missed Abel's presence, but she now had someone to fill the void she had felt for her lost children. Seth took up the dwelling of Abel's old land. He also continues the work of his brother. Now Eve called her son Seth, because she said, the great galactic father of the nebula, Uranos, which means Father Anu, has provided a substitute for our son Abel, because Cain killed him. Through him we shall see the delivering one. Seth grew up and became strong. In time, Eve accepted Seth as the perfect substitute for her son Abel. She missed Abel's presence, but she now had someone to fill the void she had felt for her lost children. Seth took up dwelling in Abel's old land. He also continues the work of his brother and seemed to know inherently within himself the resemblance he had to Abel. Now, in time, Adam and Eve gave birth to another daughter, whom they called Ava. Ava was a very beautiful woman, her emphasis being upon the outer countenance. She seemed to exude a certain numbing characteristic, which tended to mesmerize her brother. Seth had watched her grow up, looking now upon her growing maturity. He had noticed her when they played together. He noticed her alluring attractiveness. However, Seth only noticed her curiously at first, sometimes, though, flirtingly, especially now that she had become more mature and robust. Now Seth had used his reason, which he was properly endowed with. She is her own person, not a thing for my amusement. I should not look upon her so. She must give me her love willingly. Seth had a deep, loving respect, which burned within his heart for his sister Ava. His feelings for her caused him to be considerate of her wishes and physical needs. Seth had not contemplated his lower lustful feelings very long, because reason and his love for her kept his thoughts dignified. Now Seth and Ava were bathing in the big pond upon this particular day, and Ava usually wore her cloth bathing, as did Seth. Their bathing consisted of mostly swimming, diving, wading, and walking through the shallows, watching and wondering about the little creatures such as fish. Ava stood with her back to the cliffside, allowing the edge of the falls to run down her shoulder, splashing on her hair, which was now almost out of reach of the water's violent turbulence. She threw her head back, arching her back slightly, allowing the water to touch her long black hair with her hands, and her elbows were up in the air. She seemed to pay no attention to her brother, who had been watching her curiously. He noticed her form and delicate shapeliness, the slender waist being etched by Ava's ribs protruding slightly as she arched her back toward the flow of water, the waterfall that was cascading down from the highest bluffs above her. Seth watched. He watched her intently. Things were beginning to stir within him, things that had only sparingly been felt before, as he would push those thoughts aside for higher attributes of love and respect for Ava. Seth brought his eyes up to Ava's breasts, as her arching back pushed them now, straight and protruding. Seth's stomach began to churn. He felt something burning within him, a feeling of great passion like a fire, which, when it's been set, cannot be put out quickly. Seth dove under the water and swam below the surface towards Ava. He swam almost up to where Ava was standing, and then he surfaced. He stood watching her now purposefully. Ava was aware of her brother's curiosity. She had been wondering things too. She had been noticing her brother. She liked his muscular build. Tall shoulders, thick wavy blonde hair. Yes, she had been aware of her thoughts lately, which sometimes amused her, but other times only gave her uneasiness. Each day her yearning grew, yet something had made her more hesitant. There was something deep within Ava that caused her to misunderstand her own feelings. Sometimes she imagined Seth's strong arms taking her up and firmly yet lovingly holding her. They would gaze into each other's eyes and intuitively understand each other, each perceiving the other's love, showing it at first by only stares and caresses. Other times Ava didn't feel those things, but she felt repulsed by her thoughts. Somewhere inside her, there was this conflict. She didn't want to be taken forcefully. She wanted to give herself to Seth, but Seth could not always help displaying his macho style. His overbearing approach would sometimes rob Ava's desire for him. Then, when her fantasies would be faded by pictures of reality, Ava became moody. Seth felt estranged from her then, but the more Seth felt distant, the more he tried to understand her, the more she would turn away. He only knew how to act the way he was, manly and domineering. But Ava's curiosity did linger on, and there were times, like today, when Ava felt the longing consciously. Ava could feel a warm sensation within her body. She felt a certain anticipation today, an anticipation so strong that she knew it could not wait longer. Ava reached her hand up to her cloth and pulled it down, holding it loosely in her hand, her arms dangling now beside her. The cloth fell to the pond. Ava's eyes were looking away from Seth, teasingly. As Seth stared at his sister, she pushed her bottom lip up against her teeth. Now her eyes met his intense stare. They looked assuringly at each other. Seth's insides were almost ready to explode from desire for her. There was something happening to him that he had never known. He was completely divided. His reason and emotion were separated, neither acting properly, nor even at all, for that matter. All Seth could sense was passion. So Ava and Seth joined each other, touching curiously, caressing gently. The feelings of this passion growing, it split Seth's consciousness into distinctions he'd never known. So Seth and Ava had a son. They called him Enosh. It means mortal, for it was from that time that man became mortal. Seth had become mesmerized by Ava's beauty. Her lustful lure had trapped his psyche within its own barriers, and Seth could not escape the passions within himself. His consciousness fell, separating the outer reasoning powers from his astral body of emotion. Seth had fallen and taken the mental attributes away from his emotional attributes, losing sight of much that he had been. His body and Ava's had crystallized deep within this carnal nature. Now, Cain, having awakened, finding himself banished in the realm of Nod, the netherworld of the afterlife, it manifested his body into the lower vibrations of Sheol. He was crystallized metamorphically into the manifest state of quality. Cain's inner being was being reflected through his own thought forms, through the veils. He would be transforming his being from glory to glory, even as is done by the Lord. Cain was now upon his first state of vengeance. He had entered into that punishment of which our Father in heaven had spoken, after which he was to be traveling through 6 more gates. The 7th gate would be that gate of liberty that Kron had called him to. It would be the time of the restoration into the first estate. Thus Cain, having been united to Lilith on earth, was now one with her completely. Being joined with her in flesh, he was eternally bound to her, even now in this lower world of vibration. And in time he appeared to his son Enoch in a dream. For, said Cain, I will initiate him into these mysteries through these gates of my vengeance and the trials, so that he may thereby be restored to my first estate with me, where I am going. So Cain did instruct Enoch by means of dreams, and his son Enoch did begin to build a city in Nod. And so Cain did build upon this realm of Sheol a place for the souls of like being to inhabit after death. Cain knew that his children would all need a place to congregate. This place he would build with every form and bulwark, great fortress from the storm, from the realm for all those passing through. All that would be needed for the journey home to earth would be written in the patterns that Cain would build. All that Cain erected would be typical of the signification of his life. Surely his children would say, within each of their own generations, who am I? Where do I go? What shall I do to be saved, to be delivered from this awful longing? Now, Cain knew these answers partly. He knew who he was and who he had been on earth. He knew of the command of Kron to him, of the 4 veils he must pass through. Although of their actual experience, he only knew the first veil as yet. Cain also knew of the goal of which he transpired. These things he would erect monuments to within the realm of Sheol. Cain said to Enoch in the dream to his son, I shall represent the first estate, which was fallen. You shall represent the second estate, which has been initiated into the journey back. Your son you shall name Arad, for he shall represent a fugitive and a wanderer, as I also am this day. For when one has fallen into this realm, he must be initiated into these mysteries, and as a fugitive he shall live until he has passed the 7 gates. So Cain instructed Enoch to build a great city, and the city had a temple in the center thereof. The temple would have 4 courts and 7 gates, each entering and leaving one of the 4 courts. Because the temple was a spiral, the last gate was also the first gate. As there was a descending passageway that led downward back to the first gate, the entire system ascending like a spiral by steps, up from gate to gate, and then finally down and back to the first gate again. Alas, this was the fate of the sons of Cain. They would spiral around through their many gates of vengeance, until they would be brought back to their first estate again. This, as can be seen, would only lead one to the same endless round, the spiral representing the endlessness of the fate of Cain. But there was hope for Cain and all his children. At that descending passageway, down through the middle of the temple, there was a great chamber, and this was the king's chamber. For those who were worthy, the chamber would be built, and this chamber would be a path of the victors of the people of Cain. Cain built the first court. Its dimensions were 600 and 66 cubits in width, and again in breadth. Enoch constructed the walls of crystal to represent snow. It was 666 feet high, of glistening crystal. This, said Cain to Enoch, shall represent my fall into the crystallizing forms of this kingdom. Within this you cannot escape through the barrier, though it is somewhat transparent, and it allows for one to see beyond himself. It cannot be trespassed. There the initiates will be inflicted with a trial. If they pass, they shall be worthy of the second court. The first gate shall correspond to earth and the moon, where I and mother began, and the second gate is Venus. So the first court was constructed of crystal, and was carefully designed with great waterfalls and bounding fountains. The water bounded down from the great heights. The falls made a barrier which surrounded the first court. Now one could pass through the barrier with difficulty, notwithstanding they would become wet. Cain said to Enoch, this shall represent the initiation. These waters shall typify baptism, the baptism of initiation, which is signified also by thy name. It is thus the first gate of the great path of Kron for us. We shall all soon die, and all the world will be initiated into this baptism by waters upon the earth, and a baptismal font was made in the court of the first gate. Enoch constructed a wall of earth then. The wall encircled a large corridor, and it had tables. The tables were the initiation of the second court. Those of Cain's children who would be worthy to enter this court would now dine at the sacred meal. This will represent the life that we must bear with great madness. We shall sustain our lives by the common table. We shall eat the flesh of the animal, and we shall drink his blood. And as a wanderer, we shall be satisfied with death as our meal, and the death of the beast will give us life. This gate shall correspond to dry earth, for the waters on the earth shall be dried up and recede to their place. We will live in a dry desert land. The fourth gate shall correspond to thy son who is born, and him you will name Irad. The third gate shall correspond to Mercury, and he, the fourth gate, to the sun. So Enoch constructed a wall. This was the third court, and it was constructed of marble. The marble wall surrounded the court and shall represent the planes of atmosphere. Now the third court shall be made of the blue marble with swirls of white, the marble representing the wind when it blows. This wall shall surround the third court, and there shall be classes here for those who have been worthy to pass the prior gates. Here our children shall become priests, and they'll learn the mysteries. This shall lead to the fifth gate of the temple of Cain. And this gate shall be represented by the next grandson, who shall be called Methusael. And his name means the one who is of God. For only those who are of God shall leave this court. The fifth gate shall correspond to Mars, and the sixth gate to Jupiter. The fourth court shall be made of great stones. This wall shall surround the sixth and the seventh gate. To enter the corridor shall be the sacred sixth gate, and it shall be represented by the next child born of thy line, who will be called Lamech. His name means a brave man who is strong. And he shall be given the meaning of the holy oracle that leads to the seventh. Finally, the descending passageway shall lead to the seventh gate, which is also the first. The seventh gate shall be Saturn. Now in the center of the fourth court, which is in the center of the temple, and high above the ground, shall be an altar. Upon the altar shall be a sacred fire. There shall be a hole in the roof, a window where the light of the fire will shine, and it will shine through the window like a prism, and it will be like a rainbow of color. This is the rainbow of Kron's covenant to us. Cain said, this is the last court to enter. Many will see the rainbow color issuing out of the temple and nod. It shall come from here, in the innermost sanctuary of the city. But few indeed will enter the covenant, because it is a rainbow. And so it means that anyone who enters therein must come into the harmony of his being. They bring together all of their qualities, typified by the colors, into distinct manifestations, into a complete harmony. Most of our seed shall fail to enter the covenant of the rainbow. For those who enter the fourth court, and who do not harmonize their beings, to them the fire will be a place of death again. There they shall offer up the flesh of an animal's body to represent the second death, as the water represented the first death. Down into this elemental plane, the fire shall represent the second death back into the world again. For we must be born again of water and of fire. So for this reason, the next child in our line of descent shall be rejected, for he will hide in his prejudice, saying that he has invented a perfect dwelling. He will say he does not need to enter the covenant of the rainbow. There shall one day come one who will offer our descendants a salvation from a great time of trouble. But he will reject this, and he will be rejected himself. He will like the creation that he has made, and despise this one's counsel. He shall convince all of our descendants not to accept the salvation of that one. But one from among our descendants will be sought, and they will look to his brother, whom they will call Jubal. And he will also reject the counsel of the wise one, but instead he will invent music. He will play beautiful melodies upon a stringed instrument. If this will only mesmerize his thinking and those who follow him, many will take up the strings and forget the counsel of the wise one. He will not be able to understand that he must enlighten his mind with the higher truth of our Father Kron. Yes, by harmonizing the heart with love and joy and peace and long-suffering kindness and goodness and faith and mildness and self-control and sincerity. So they will not be able to enter the covenant of the rainbow. They will have no leader to help them. Then they will give to Lamech, son of Cain, another wife, that he would bring forth finally a savior for the sons of Cain. This son also, through his new wife, will not produce the desired leader. This one they will call Tubal-Cain, called after myself. He will not understand the mysteries, and he will think that the way to the covenant of peace will be by war. He will contrive many kinds of weapons from copper and iron. He will teach the art of smelting in the metals for the technological use, and this will fail the people as well. Tubal-Cain will persuade many, and multitudes will be misled. So shall another heir be sought, but the only heir that will be left shall be a woman. And all the people shall reject her, saying, "She is a woman. Never has the heir been a woman. It's blasphemy." Nevertheless, she shall be the one who will save the people. Through her, the line of Cain shall be saved. She shall be called Naamah, which means pleasantness. She will bring what is pleasing to Kron and men. And Naamah will enter into the covenant of the rainbow and the covenant of peace. And mankind will be given the new chance, and the wars of the earth shall cease for many years. So Cain became the prince of the elemental world. Cain lived 45 years and he died. He was taken by the hand of the seraphic angel to the elemental world, which was a world exactly like the earth plane, but more refined. There the world was being built according to Cain's own likeness. Cain and Lilith were building the world by the forms of their own minds, just as on the earth. Adam and Eve had seen the earth change as they themselves translated their minds deeper into the carnal nature. Cain's world was a vast one. The ecology of that world was exactly like the earth, for all planes work on that same law. Only Cain's world was not within the plane of fixity, like the forms on earth. Earth was fixed. It is where the images of the mind form into the reality of the human nature. Here in Sheol, the images are more fluid and changing. This world was the place for change. The place would be the place of purgatory, a place of punishment and progress. Both Cain and Abel were all there together. Cain was there, yes, but Abel would not be able to know of him now. Abel was the prince of the higher nature in the nether world. Cain was the king of the lower portions and the nature of this world. Through 4 subplanes of Sheol he would need to be transformed until he could finally reach the place of his natural estate again. So Cain went out from the earth plane to the nether world, to the first subplane of the elemental plane. He had been given the form of a beast. Now he was adapting to that first plane. He would appear as an aquatic amphibian reptile. Cain had received the power of the second gate, his power being represented by his fin-like tail. He had finished his course upon the frozen fixity of the first subplane, of the first court typified by ice. Now, Cain ruled over two subplanes, reigning with the power of the two gifts or signets. These signs are marks that Cron had promised Cain. Now Samayo appeared unto Cain, swimming up to Cain, gliding like a serpent in the water. For Samayo was given the body of a serpent, endowed with the four powers of the universe. He had the ability to slither upon land. He had wings as well to fly through the air, which is how Samayo could approach all those in all kingdoms, subduing and slandering and deceiving all that could beguiled. Aside from the amphibious nature and the wings, he also could enter into the holes of the earth, approaching even the lowliest of the creatures beneath the ground, for he had great scales covering his entire body, and these could withstand the great temperatures within the lava cavities, down in the caverns. And of course, he had a voice, and this was the power of man, through which he could deceive Eve. Now Samayo was endowed with ears, with which he could learn great knowledge. This, though partly to his advantage, will also yet lead to his downfall. For Cron had given Samayo these attributes, but had tricked him in this respect, because it is by the ears that a man may himself defeat the great deceiver. And if a man learn the proper method, he cannot be seduced by this cunning one. Though Samayo can hear instruction, he will not usually accept it. Now, this learning of his, it has corrupted him with pride. So it is that a man may lure to a stupor the great deceiving serpent with the vibrations and the harmonies of the outer worldly knowledge. So now these are the four great attributes: to swim in water, to slither on land, fly through the air, and there was one more attribute that Cron had given Samayo. The tempter could mesmerize the lower vibrations of the elemental fire nature. Samayo could look at his opponent, stare into his eyes, and cause them to change their will. He had the power to mesmerize the senses by an enchantment of lust. It's the nature of the fire. But being powerful, it reaches unto the first realm, though it is the fourth, as there are four realms to which Samayo rules. The first is that of the water, the second is that of the earth, the third is that of air, and the fourth is that of fire. Samayo had been cast out of paradise along with Adam. It was this one attribute that Samayo had forfeited, the ability to walk upright with the two legs. With these two legs he stood tall, and he could feel the dignity and the confidence. But now Cron had taken away Samayo's dignity, and he had committed him to slithering like a serpent upon the earth, outside of the plane of earth. Now Adam did not lose this dignity, as did Samayo. This shows that man is superior to him, and he will eventually go back to paradise, but to that plane Samayo will never return, and this because he had deceived Eve and all those living. But if you will receive it, man is already endowed with the power of entering paradise. Man does not perceive his worthiness. He sees himself debased along with his enemy, for the very reason he feels it necessary to relinquish his own powers until his consciousness of evil in this world is reconciled. Adam could not live without Eve. Thus he relinquished his powers willingly, partaking of the fruit without being deceived. He thus died willingly that he might redeem his body and bring together again the lower forces into harmony. Adam knew he could not dwell upon the paradisical plane while his lower potencies dwelled upon the other plane. His sense of love and compassion had compelled him to relinquish his power, and Cron had provided a way back. As man finally redeems his subtle bodies and that of the emotional and mental bodies in the fall. Now, Cain was sitting upon a cleft in a rock which jettisoned out from this great chasm in the sea. This wasn't the earthly sea, but a vast reservoir within the elemental plane. Though it cannot be seen with a man's natural eye, it's nevertheless there within the nether world. So Cain sat high in the air upon a rocky sheet of ice which protruded out from the mammoth-like wall of crystallized forms within this kingdom. Cain could still crawl out from the sea and sit upon this dry, crystallized forms in his plain. Now Cain saw Samayo coming toward his little rock upon which he was sitting. A beautiful white, swirling trail being left behind the deceiver as he slithered through the dark turquoise waters. Above him was ever-lightening turquoise. Beneath him, ragged cliffs in various forms of vegetation, growing in and out of the clefts and crevices in the sides of the chasm. Cain had been exploring the chasm today. He saw an abundance of beautiful things there. The elemental water creatures swimming here and there, floating plasmic-like half-creatures, fibrous plants, one-celled organisms, breathing creatures which resembled many aquatic mammals he had known on Earth, and other intrigues and fascinations which Cain could have explored for weeks on end without having seen it all. Cain assumed that this creature coming towards him was just another grotesque creature from this unusual plane of the netherworld. But watching more carefully, Cain could see more clearly now what was approaching him. Cain stood upright, balancing himself against the cliff with his tail. The awesome creature approaching Cain spoke. "Hello!" This startled Cain. Yet Cain could not easily be startled. He had seen so many things in his long journeys. Not only that, Cain almost instinctively knew who this was. But consciously, he was ignorant of all of this. "Who are you?" Cain replied to this creature. "How is it you speak?" "I am a friend," Samayo countered. "I am the king of this world, and also many others like it. I am God. I have come to make you my subject." Cain laughed. "Me, your subject? Why should I subject myself to you? I am the king of this world, and Lilith is my queen. We have a son named Enosh. Someday he will come here too, from the realm of earth, and I will relinquish my throne to him. For I will go into the second subplane of the elemental realms. I will take up my kingdom next, and then I will rule. But how is it I should give my dominion to you, you who are not my heir, one that I don't even know?" Samael replied in answer to Cain, "Oh, but I am God. I rule not only this world, but the world in which you were born. I am the prince of the four kingdoms. You shall do my will upon this elemental kingdom, and I shall rule over you with kindliness." "Kron is ruler, no one else," said Cain. "I shall not listen to your lies. Go away, Samael, you great deceiver of all. I have heard of you. It is you who seduced my mother. You have no part in this land, nor in my throne. I am God, and there is none else, and you will bow to me and serve me, and you will bow to no other but me. For I am God, and there is none else. And not only this, but you must obey my rule over thee," Samael persisted, "for without me you will have no wife. For Lilith is my twin sister. If you will not listen to me, I will go to her, and she will listen, but your house will be divided." Cain was completely astonished by this revelation. But Cain did not allow this fear to show, and he just said, "Be gone with you, Samael, or I shall run you through with my horn. Be gone, you cunning slanderer, or I shall crush thy head with my great tail." And so Samael flew up through the water with a plunging force, plumes of bubbles trailing around him, becoming lost out of sight, encircled within his thrust, and Cain sighed a relief and sat back down on the rock. Cain sat thinking for a while. What would he do if Samael was right? Could Lilith be Samael's sister? Cain cried out in agony, his roar heard throughout the elemental plane, resounding from every crevice and every canyon. Samael heard Cain as he was leaving. He knew he had struck the right chord. Cain's heart was pulsating with tremendous throbs. He knew what he must do. He knew that Samael would be his downfall. If ever Samael reached his wife, Lilith, he must not allow this to happen. But how could he stop Samael? He who had once been on the great council of the gods. He who had deceived his mother. He who even Adam could not defeat in battle. Cain thought quickly. He would give his life if necessary, but he will stop this intruder with every power that Kron had given him. It was not Cain's way to pussyfoot around. He knew in his fit of great rage what he must do. So he slapped his tail against the rock, pushing his immense body through the water. the waves pulsating around him as he sped through the sea bottom, swerving in and out of the rocks and cliffs, his tail acting as a giant thrust machine. Cain's blood still throbbing with rage, he saw Samayo in the water, right ahead of him. "Halt, slanderer," said Cain. "I shall rend you through. I will not allow you to estrange my wife, even if she is your sister. For whether she is or whether she is not, it makes no difference to me. For I shall rend you through, without a doubt, and then you will no more act cunningly to deceive us again. I will avenge my wife, my mother, and Kron. You will die, and you will be debased forever." Samayo raised himself up on his tail, perched upon the floating motion of the water beneath him. "You shall not succeed, Cain. I have power that you do not know." Cain couldn't take it anymore. He lunged with a great force towards Samayo's massive frame. His tail came spinning around from behind him, piercing the water like a razor's edge. It slapped up against Samayo and whipped up around his body with a threatening grip. His head pushed forward, he plunged his great horn straight through Samayo's chest. A mass of water being thrown forward by his tail motion, a surging wave began making its way toward the shore. Samayo was taken off his guard. He hadn't believed that Cain would do such a thing, and he was surprised by Cain's tremendous strength. But Samayo was also strong. Now, Samayo opened his jaws. His teeth were like sharks, only more threatening. He bit down on Cain's neck, blood shooting and streaming, their massive bodies intertwined in the struggle. Swirling masses of water, white mixed with red, pluming colonnades of surging bubbles. Cain felt the pain shoot down from his back as Samayo ripped huge pieces of Cain's flesh right off his body. Cain sent a blood-curdling roar that echoed through the entire 4 subplanes, and Lilith heard her husband. Lilith was awakened. Lilith knew not what was transpiring, yet intuitively she sensed that something awesomely tragic was happening. Lilith sped out through her cave opening and swam with all her might toward the screen. Cain tightened his grip upon Samayo, with one great groan reverberating again throughout the entire kingdom. He pressed his strength to the limit, his tail slipping up around Samayo's head, and Cain squeezed. Samayo's head was stopped now for a moment from ripping more of Cain's flesh, and Cain plunged his horn again deeply into Samayo's chest. Samayo's green blood spilling now into the mingling red and white. Samayo roared. Now he was angry. Samayo was circling his tail now, near Cain's head, his anguish being felt now in his resounding cry. "I will crush your head, Cain. I am tired of your trifles." Just then Lilith arrived, charging with her every force. She came upon Samayo, her brother, swinging around her tail, striking his frame. The force knocked Samayo free from Cain's death grip. Then she rushed in to her husband, and clutching him, she cried, "Stop, stop, I say. I will not allow this fight. I will not leave here. You both will have to kill me to get to the other." Samayo shook his head to get the feeling back in his neck. Blood running down his chest, he stood completely shocked, but he did not do anything. He needed Cain. He needed Lilith. And he hoped that Cain would not continue on this course, for he knew what then he would have to do. He would have to kill them both. Cain hesitated. "Let me go, Lilith. I must kill this beast. Let me to my business, woman. You have no part in this. Go home." Lilith answered Cain, "I cannot allow you to fight this one, for he is my brother. But, woman, I am the only being that can do this thing. Your brother is my enemy. I must finish him now." "No," Lilith retorted. "He is not your enemy. He is my brother, the father of darkness. I am his accomplice, the accomplice to darkness. All that I am, I owe to this. I shall not allow you to fight this one. Besides, you do not even know his power. You cannot kill him anyway. Only all the forces of light can destroy him, and yet he comes back again to rule. Though he disappear from your sight, he will only be transformed into another world. Your powers of those 2 subplanes are dependent upon him. He holds the keys to these mysteries. When Kron sent you here, he sent you under his authority, and you cannot escape him." So Cain ceased his aggression and hung his head, realizing that he was defeated. "I shall listen to your voice, my Lilith, but I shall not be ruled by this one. We will talk of this in the morning." So Cain turned to Samayo, saying, "You shall not receive my kingdom from me, and neither shall you control me through my Lilith. Go away before I rend you through with my secret power. For I also have a secret power that you do not know, neither you nor Lilith. So I will spare you if you leave right now." Now, Samayo did not believe Cain, but he did not want to kill him. Samayo wanted to rule Cain. He needed his plane as a means to his own selfish ends. Neither did he really love his sister, but he needed her to get to Cain. So Samayo went away for now, for he had plans to capture Cain's kingdom, but now he would need to go away and heal. But he would be back. So Samayo sped out away, the water rippling behind him. Samayo the invincible. He had been wounded, but he had been wounded in more ways than one. This was a shock to Samayo's reason. He had not anticipated the power of this one called Cain. The council of the gods had empowered him well, Samayo thought to himself. This would not be easy. If he could not defeat Cain in battle, he would defeat him through Lilith, cunningly, through deception. After all, Samayo had the right to this world. Hadn't he been the one who created all of this? Yes, it had been Samayo, the deceiver, who had created all of this through Lilith. Lilith is his power outworking. She was the master worker along with his sister Achilea, the wise one. Achilea was the most beautiful lady. She had infiltrated the elemental plane where Abel was. She had secretly formed and veiled Abel's every thought and desire. Though Abel had not been aware of her subtle presence, she was active just the same. If Samayo was the deceiver, Achilea was Samayo's greatest accomplishment. Not only had she infiltrated the astral plane of emotion, but she had done it uniquely, cunningly, planning. She had made Abel fall for the entire plan. She had welded her illusions around Abel's realities. She had interconnected wisdom with emotion, making this link indissoluble.